Hi, my name is Benedict. This is one of those sort of funny in-between videos, something that's come up and I've seen again, and I sort of felt like I didn't really hear anything about this instrument for forever, maybe in part because I was in Reason and we didn't have VST, but just in the last couple of days, Synth1 has landed its name in front of me, perhaps a bit more than usual, in one part because I gave an answer to something on KVR and somebody said, "Oh, Synth1." And it's like, yeah, it's actually not really a useful answer. He was technically correct, but it wasn't an answer to the question. And that reminded me of how in the old days it was always Synth1 was the answer to every question. You know, how do I get off my drug addiction? Synth1! How do I get the best for Synth1? No, it's like, oh, I want to score more chicks. Synth1! To be honest, back in the early 2000s when this thing came out, I wasn't actually bowled over by it. Probably a little bit of a mistake, but I wasn't bowled over by it. But I had other things that I was using that I was enjoying at least as much as Synth1. It was in my repertoire. I used it from time to time. It wasn't like I hated it. There were some frustrations, as you'll see, which have not changed because this device has not changed since 2014, I think the last update to it was. It's abandonware now. To get it, you have to go into Wayback Machine. But nonetheless, it keeps coming up. The other reason it came up was that somebody was actually asking me, can you duplicate some Nord lead sounds into Synth1? Reason he's attached the two is because the idea behind Synth1 was that it was supposed to be emulating the architecture of a Nord lead. How the two sound together, I really don't know. I shouldn't imagine that they're hand in hand. But it's not a bad synth. I thought I'd have a look at it again. So I downloaded it to see if I could solve this guy's problem. Number one thing is, does it run in Reason? It does. And it's actually capable of sounding very nice indeed. That's just everything on board. There's nothing but on board. Sometimes the effects can use a little bit of getting used to. The stuff that lives up in here, I might have to read a manual, and I think it's ugly. There's better ways of doing it, but this is going back a very long time, so that's really not a problem. The tempo delay is okay. Sometimes it seems a bit loud, but that's fixable. The choruses work great on some patches, not so great on others, and that's almost always the case with built-in effects. Sometimes they work great on a patch, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just become the sound of that instrument. The arpeggiator, well, there's better arpeggiators. But it does what it's supposed to do. It's simple, but very effective. You've got a couple of LFOs. There's no mod matrix, so you really can't assign things to different places, but it's not that much of an issue until you get to performance nuance. One of the reasons I did drop this was because I went to Reason, and Reason had Subtractor, and Subtractor was designed by one of the guys who did the Nord. So a lot of people in the early days actually said Synth1 was copied from Subtractor. There are some similarities, but they're kind of not the same. But there are a couple of things that Synth1 does that Subtractor doesn't, and vice versa. So back to where I just was before I distracted myself. Performance. Performance stuff is relatively limited. Really just to a couple of external sources. You love these pop-up menus. They're external MIDI sources you can assign to one destination. And yep, that bit works. Velocity to filter. I think that's to... Actually, let's just check this. So it's to filter a mount. That's what I thought. So to the filter a mount, it sends which is the same as what you get in Subtractor, but Subtractor has a lot more things that you can assign your velocity and a couple other controllers to, whereas this kind of lacks that. You've got velocity to overall volume, velocity to the amount of envelope modulation. And unless I'm really missing something, that's it. So you can make nice sounds, but you can't always have them move so well in the mix. However, that's a nice sound. Whilst I was playing around with it, I also made a really nice sort of somewhere between electromechanical and DX7 electric piano, and it's a nice sound. It actually hung like it was a real sound. Sometimes synths sound like they're like flat against your screen kind of thing. They feel very dead, but this sound actually was really nice. The fact that it's got a little EQ built in and a tone balancer, so high-low pass kind of tilt sort of agenda, is actually a nice thing. There are some annoyances with this, and this was annoying way back when it first came out, is that your knobs have this great pop-up thing, which doesn't go away until you click somewhere else. So if I've got that set and then I go to there, sometimes they don't seem to want to pick up. There's no automatic recentering or home feature for your knobs. You just have to know that if you want it in the middle, it's going to have to go to 63 if it doesn't have a thing that tells you. Some things tell you, like we're perfectly in tune. We're at, I think, an octave. No, this one doesn't have octaves. When we're perfectly in tune, that comes on. Don't know what that light's for when that comes on, when it's active. But some things have things that light up when you're perfectly on an octave, and that's kind of nice, but it's just slightly inelegant. Sometimes you're on 0 and it's still not lit up. But the big annoyance is, and you can't do it all the time, is sometimes these things just bounce. Also, sometimes this says 0, but when you come back later, it says a different amount. That's quite a common one. Now, the bounce is just kind of annoying, but when it says 0 on the slider, but it's not 0 there, if it sounds great, not a problem, but you've just got to be careful, because sometimes you come back and things aren't where you think they're going to be. You can consider that a strength or a liability if you want, whichever you want. So nice synth, very simple, very free. You probably have to go to KVR and press the download link, and it takes you off to Wayback Machine, and then you have to hit translate because it's in Japanese. It's not quite as smooth, and then you've got to physically drag it into your folder. It tells you to do something else which I didn't even understand. It was not well translated, but it's working just fine. So cool instrument. So I do understand a lot more now why people might still be using this blast from the past. Then, of course, being me, I had to think, well, okay, is this worth keeping in my folder? Because I don't like a busy folder. Can I, seeing I have Subtractor, and Subtractor I very much saw as a good replacement for it, and then, of course, I've got Thor as well. So do I need to keep this? Can I get that sound from the other instruments? To be fair, let's turn off these effects, because Subtractor doesn't have any effects built in. One of the things that this has that Subtractor doesn't have is that Oscillator 1 has a detune. So Oscillator 1 can actually be a multi-oscillator. Subtractor does not do this. Thor does, Subtractor doesn't. So that's a thing. But Subtractor, just like this, you can FM Oscillator 2 to Oscillator 1. You can control that via a mod envelope. So the two are sort of right on top of each other in that sense. That's basically the real differences. The difference we're going to get to when we get to Thor is its ability to FM. Just, it's a little different. So, a bit dry, so we'll put in, just get this out of the way. See, we've turned off the effects. We'll put in an effect. So it's one of my own. It's a pair of delay lines. One of them set up to work as a chorus. The other one's set up to work as echoes. And I'm using pulsar to make them move around. I like the sound of it. So Synth1. If we move across to Subtractor, we can get quite a similar sound from it. Now these filters are not designed necessarily to be the same as each other. So one of the problems that you can encounter is not necessarily that the filters sound too different, because filters don't always sound as different as the marketing would lead you to believe. But often what is different is where you might put the knob. So we might start here by saying, well, okay, on Synth1, I have my filter frequency knob set to here, so I'll try and find the same position and assume it's going to sound the same. But if they have a different curve as to what frequency that knob position represents, they're going to sound quite different. So you can by all means start with saying, okay, I'll put them in the same spot. But it doesn't mean they're going to end up sounding the same. So you have to use your ears. And in this case, between the two instruments, I've used the low pass 12 here, but the 24 seems to do the job better. Now, I'm smart enough and old enough to realise now that trying to emulate instruments to sound exactly the same is really stupid. To get them close enough for knife fighting that people in a pub won't notice the difference, that's all you've got to do. So we're managing that. We don't have an EQ built into Subtractor. So I've taken my best guess as to what's going on here, duplicated using this device. I chose a PEQ2 because it's actually around at the time of Subtractor. So rather than grabbing the newer device, which didn't exist then, I thought, look, okay, let's be time appropriate. Because Subtractor doesn't have this detune on its oscillators are just straight oscillators, then I thought, well, okay, the only way I can duplicate that is to either duplicate subtractors inside a combinator, which would work, works very nicely, or just to use the unison. Again, time appropriate. So the unison detuning is having a lot to do with this. So if you just walk straight from Synth1 to Subtractor, using this feature alone, that one knob, you won't get the sound. But when you understand how it works and you put in the right balance, same. The other thing is that Synth1 has saturation inside the filter model. Exactly where it sits, I don't know. It could well sit after, I don't know. There's nothing in Subtractor for any kind of drive at all. So we've pulled in screen. I've used the tape setting, which rolls off a little bit of the brightness. If we turn this off, there's not a lot of difference. But it adds that little bit of to the sound, which you do get out of Synth1. Synth1's behaving quite nicely in that way. So that's pretty workable emulation. And then to Thor, the almighty Thor. Actually, let's just fold this up so that it's easier access. The almighty Thor. Different sound, but we can get into the same territory. The straight analog oscillator doesn't have any kind of detuning, but there is a multi-oscillator. There's a trade-off here with Thor's architecture. If we use a straight analog oscillator, we've got the ability to do the FM from oscillator 2 to oscillator 1. However, despite the fact that it's offered with the multi-oscillator, which gets us over this detuning problem, if you assign oscillator 2 to oscillator 1's FM, where is it? Sorry, wrong one. Oscillator 1 to the FM, nothing happens. Now I should imagine that's because this is a multi-oscillator and they probably found it either too hard or just that it made a ghastly noise. So it's just simply part of the feature set that they behave differently. So how do I solve that? I could look at using ring modulation. That's one way. The other way is to look at using coarse FM. And I can still control it with an envelope. With small amounts of coarse FM, as in literal frequency modulation as opposed to the phase distortion that the Yamaha's FM is, small amounts you can get away without really noticing the pitch problems. But seeing this as a brass sound, pitching problems at the beginning of a brass note are very much par for the course. They tend to blow and actually have a sound at the beginning. A lot shorter, a lot more subtle, but depending upon how the brass is played, quite noticeable. So we find a workable solution. Again, no EQ on board. So do I need Synth1? No, because even though they're not exactly the same as each other, they're close enough. Will I keep Synth1? Yeah, I will. Here's just a wee something so that you can hear them back to back. Let it run again. So, three similar instruments, three very similar outcomes. Yes, if you've been pedantic, you can say, oh, they're really different. But you know what, in a mix, especially down the pub on a Friday night when everyone's had a little or two, nobody's going to notice that your synth sound isn't kind of the same as the final countdown. So, if you don't have Synth1, but you have Subtractor or Thor, you probably don't really need Synth1. Seeing it's free, by all means go out and get it, but if it's going to clutter up your life, don't. But if it is there, It's actually a pretty cool toy. It's from forever ago, but it does do its job quite nicely. Thank you.